All right, action.
Hello, my name is Dean Fogal and I'm a visual artist living in North Vancouver. Just a brief history of my career. I worked mainly in theatre for the last 40 or so years and built schools and studios and helped build a fire hall theatre. And after our full-time school closed, I decided to do something more personal for a while and to see how that would go. And I got interested in the last 10 years in visual art. I'd always been working in that field somewhat, but suddenly I had a lot of time to work. And one of the things that I found first, I came across this material called acrylic felt. It was recycled from plastic bottles, and I thought, well, wow, that's so great, because I'd really been concerned about all kinds of climate change issues and habitat issues for animals and various things. So I looked on the internet to see if anybody was using this material, and I couldn't find much. So I thought, well, I was kind of afraid of brushes, rollers, palette knives, all these things that normal artists use. So I thought, I'm not afraid of this material. So I got some scissors and I started to work and found out that laughingly that when I looked at the records of Matisse, whose work I really admired, he was very big at the end of his career on painting with scissors, as he called it. So I thought, well, I'm beginning as an artist to work with scissors, and so I'll just work with this material. So I'll just show you the phases that I went through from scissors to paper, which included scissors, of course, and what else did I do? I started working with acrylics and various other paints and inks, and I went into impressions. I found some shoes during this one storm that had left wonderful imprints in the snow and ice, so I got involved in making impressions. Kept feeling, I'm not sure if I'm an artist or an engraver or a sculptor, I'm not sure. Anyway, I kept forging ahead, and then finally went into working with wire portraits. I was very interested in wire portraits. So I'll just go quickly through and show you some of the phases that I've gone through. This is one of the early works that I did. It's called Rhinos Argue Territory Below, as above three women head for the sun. This came out of the image that, we spent a lot of time arguing about real estate. I came across this quote that said, we spend all of our time concentrating on 3 square centimeters of real estate below, where all kinds of wonderful things are going up right above our heads. The whole cosmos is reeling above our heads. So this image was based on that idea that all of these lower animals are forging and competing for space when these women are just in flight heading for the sun. So this one, I got interested in this particular kind of acrylic felt, and I started buying it by the yard instead of small squares. And the pink one was the only one I found where you could see images below. So I started thinking, well, that's kind of interesting because it could simulate water with whales or fish underneath it. So this is, again, with this idea of eco-friendly realities in mind, where it's kind of imagining that in the future, or perhaps even now, that these natural forms have to protect one another, and the trees are benevolent enough to open up a space underneath them, fill it with water, and make a safe space for fish or for whales. And my imagination got carried away, and I thought, well, it might even be fun to not only create this little ocean under the trees, but open them up so that the whales could climb the trees. So this is called Whales in Trees, again with acrylic felt. And this is actually a print of something I've done, and again it's that theme. It's called A Tree Decides to Speak for Birds Everywhere. I was very concerned the more I looked around at species that were being, whose habitats were being ruined by all kinds of us. I started to realizing, well, in a forest fire, the animals don't fight. There's no real predators. They all just run and they protect each other and they get along. So I thought, well, in a sense, we're in a forest fire. The world is in a forest fire. So this is a tree that decides to become a tree, this is a tree that decides to become a bird so that he can be large enough to speak on behalf of birds everywhere, especially migratory birds. And this is paper. I've gone from felt now to paper, but again with the same tools that Matisse suggested, painting with scissors. I didn't have the courage to use these other tools. And this is another example where, and I should mention maybe briefly that Plato had this interesting idea that he called it the noumenal world. And it was a world of patterns before the ideas hit the material world. And in that world, there's reality, but nothing's connected, so that you can have things that are not connected to each other. And in that world, the treetops could be birds, or the clouds, clouds could come down and become the branches and the leaves of a tree. So anyway, I imagine trees getting married in this image, and having all of these forms that are kind of unformed forms gather around as the guests of the wedding. Now, went a little bit further. I did this many times. I was insisting on the you can't really see this probably in the film, but I was insisting on the branches of these clouds that had come down, these pastel clouds that had come down to become the leaves and the branches. I did it several times so that these branches would actually show. And I was also exploring the difference between cut paper and ripped paper. I found there was a tremendous difference between the ripping of paper and having a very soft kind of fragile edge, and also the cut paper. So I was starting to get a little bit more of a handle on how to use the scissors and when to put them aside and just use my hands. This one is quite small, but this is the first image you can see of the footprints. Went to all these shops and bought little kids' shoes, quite embarrassed to buy these shoes. Anyway, and then cover the soles with acrylic paint and then press them into paper. And I called this quantum because it seemed to me a kind of vibrato or vibration. It seemed to suggest something under the reality, under the surface of reality, and I quite liked it. Most of these were in black and white, by the way. This was another one that, again, I mentioned the shoes, but there was one set of boots that had, to my total surprise, music embedded into the leather of this boot. I'd never seen anything like this. So I went nuts and started. This is an enlargement. Sorry, this is an enlargement of the original because the original was smaller. But this is the heel of the boot, and these are all musical signatures and notes and clefs and various things that were actually in the boot. I kind of added things with rollers just to augment and create more drama in the image. But it was one of those things when you occasionally create something in this crazy field of visual art, you just feel it works. You don't know how it works, and also you feel it works because it's an accident. You didn't do it, but somehow you did a bunch of things, and somehow all of these little bits come together and work. So for me, it's one of those few things that really worked, and I could recognize that. Now, this is another whole area that I started to get into. The work started to get more complex, and I started to think, well, maybe I'm an engraver or a sculptor after all. And I started to get involved in different kinds of wire. Particularly because I've come from a theater background, I'm very interested in Shakespeare's fools and the clowns in literature. And this was fun because it had a sense of movement to it. All of these parts vibrated on their own. There was something kind of inherent in that image that I thought was good. So this one's called Nobody's Fool. And I got very interested in making portraits out of wire. Oh, the other thing that I did, first of all, before getting to this point, was that I made huge heads and busts out of wire. And I thought, well, they're really kind of interesting, but you have to put a whole surround around them to see them. They're so fine. So I thought, oh my God, almost need a theater to hold these images. So I started squashing them, which sounds terrible, but I squashed them in order to have a background. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll paint and do things behind the background and create, faces and landscapes and all kinds of things behind the things. And then I was surprised because I had seen a lot of masks and a lot of busts in wire even, but I hadn't really seen anything that had imagery, painted imagery behind the mask. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So this is called Nobody's Fool. And maybe this is the last one I'll show you. This is called Yarrow Stick Man without his I Ching. And the idea, all of these little sticks are the same number in the I Ching that you throw when you do the yarrow stick. And I laughed at this one because even his eyebrows are part of the yarrow sticks. And the idea, and his mouth, and the idea here was that that we, in modern society, we use cell phones, but we don't know how to make one. And everything we use, it seems, we don't know how to produce those things. We just use them. So this is a spoof on modern man that has all this ability to do things, but lacks the I Ching, it lacks the source material or real understanding of how to interpret those things. So he's throwing all these crazy sticks around him, but he's standing there embarrassed because he doesn't really know what to do with the outcome. So anyway, that's another of these strange portraits. Maybe I'll show you just this large one at the to end as I commit suicide to change the lighting. This is actually going back a little bit because it was a long series that I did about trees, and started working with tree images, and this is actually a shadow of the tree. And it's really called Birch's Dance, and I did these trees in different seasons. Very simple, but they have feet. They're escaping the earth, and they're dancing. So I tried to work as simply as I could. This one is with felt, and all of these 4 series are in different colors, reflecting the season. Anyway, I guess the thing that I'd maybe like to add is that that the artwork for me has shown me a real interest and a commitment to things like, protecting habitat for animals and all these things. And I was always interested in those kinds of ecological things or climate change issues. But the artwork seemed to, because it was so filled with connections, you do this and that connects to this, and you do footwork, you create footprints, and look at the voyage of those, and it starts to turn into a skyscape and all kinds of things happening in the air. It really pointed in the direction of the connections that we all need as we live, and as we're going to be asked to make, I think, in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that art is one of those things, because of its very nature, encourages connection, it literally does in a tangible way. So anyway, thanks very much for listening to all this, and yeah, I hope it was of some interest. Thanks so much.